Welcome back to the Fishing for a Reason podcast, you guys. I am super fired up because today we've got a special guest joining us from right here in our personal backyard. We are talking to Brittany Palm, who leads the Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences Program at Bellingham Technical College. And if you guys heard our previous episode on the Bellingham Bay Fishery, I think it was episode number 28. Go back and check that one out. But we're going to dive into the people who make that fishery happen and some of the details that I'm super curious about as a newbie to learning more about this fishery. So I'm going to ask those questions that you guys have been sending my way, as well as a few that are on my own heart. So if you've ever wondered about what the next generation of fishery scientists, hatchery managers, and aquatic experts are coming from, or how recreational anglers like us can play a role in helping sustain a healthy fish population, this conversation is for you. So stay tuned in and make sure to comment if you have additional questions. Let us know because we'll follow up and find out. So, Brittany, thank you so much for taking time out of your super busy schedule to talk to us today. We are really excited to get to know more about you and the program that you run.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here.
And at first, I'd just love to know, do you mind sharing a little bit about your journey? What drew you to marine biologies and fishery science? Tell us the story.
Yeah. So I am not originally from the Pacific Northwest. I grew up on Long Island in New York, and I grew up fishing with my dad recreationally. And some of my earliest memories are of surf casting on the beach with him in those kind of twilight hours where, the world is quiet and you're just watching your fishing pole. And, as a little kid, it was really exciting and probably a really smart parenting tactic that my job was to watch the pole and watch for it to bounce because it kept me occupied. But that was earliest memories of just living at the beach and fishing, and I loved it. And I was, to use the pun, I was hooked at a really young age. And I just knew that I loved being on the water and around the water. And my parents were like, well, you got to look into marine biology. And it was like early. I think I took my first like marine science camp when I was, I don't know, maybe in fourth or fifth grade. And it was such a cool camp. It was through the Cornell Cooperative Extension. And that was out on the east end of Long Island. And as part of the summer camp, we got to like work in the scallop hatchery, which was a restoration
Cool.
hatchery. And so like we were helping like kayak out and like, put the scallop seeds out. And I really was just all in at that point. So whether it was finfish or shellfish, I just loved it all. And so I was very heavy in the sciences in high school and volunteered as much as I could. Spent a lot of time fishing with my dad. And then I went to undergrad at University of New England, and that was a pretty hands-on program. I remember in my sophomore year, I got to volunteer in a research lab, and that was with Dr. James Solokowski, and he was a shark and skate stingray, elasmobranchs as we call them. That was his area of specialty. So I was like a sophomore in college and working the shark fishing tournaments and like seeing these like massive blue sharks come in, and we were collecting like their blood samples and measuring their liver levels. Like it was just so cool. And so I was like, I knew this is what I was on the right path. This is what I needed to do. And so when I finished my undergrad, I accepted a position with NOAA Fisheries, and I worked down in the Gulf of Mexico. And at that time, I also started my master's program in kind of focusing on benthic diet ecology, working with the groundfish fishery down there. And I was about a year or so, no, it was a little later. I was a few years into it. And then Deepwater Horizon oil spill happened.
Ooh.
And that was a pretty big part of my career where I just saw this like devastating oil spill and how it impacted not only my own research as a fishery scientist, but also the fishery that we were there to be supporting and monitoring and helping, as well as the entire community. I mean, that oil washed right up onto the beaches and into the estuaries and into these
Wow.
really important nursery systems. And so when I finished my master's, I realized that I wanted to get more involved with outreach and education and not be just so focused on my own research where I was doing important work, but then you publish the research and you move on to the next thing. There's not, I needed that connection with the community just to be a part of working towards a greater good. And so at that point, when I finished my master's, I accepted a Fulbright scholarship, a Fulbright research position, and I actually moved to the west coast of Ireland. And
Oh,
that's when
cool.
yeah, it was amazing. And that's when I started to study salmon. And so salmon actually came into my life a little later in my
Fascinating.
career and my journey. And while I was working in the west coast of Ireland, I was there studying the influences on what causes a salmon to come home. So we were looking at marine growth rates and the genetic and environmental triggers that say, yep, you're ready to return home. So I got to work with a number of Irish hatcheries, and they call the technique out there ranching, which I really love. I
Oh,
almost
that's funny.
wish that we would adopt that language here because it makes a lot of sense. What a fish hatchery is that they're almost ranchers
Yeah.
because you raise the fish when they're their most vulnerable, and then as soon as they're ready for a sea migration, you release them, and then they spend the vast majority of their life, because we only have them in the hatchery for a small portion, but the vast majority of their life is out in the wild. They're out roaming, they're ranching, if you will. And then eventually they come home. And so that was when I really fell in love with working with salmon. And so after my Fulbright research, I then accepted a research position at Memorial University in Newfoundland, Canada. And as part of my research there, I worked with a local nonprofit to help restore what once had been an extinct population of Atlantic salmon in the capital city of St. John's. And I was doing that project for about 3 years. And as I was wrapping that project up, we had our first out migrating smolts. So it was just a really successful, wonderful project, and that project's still going on. And then after my work in Newfoundland, Canada, I accepted the position here at BTC.
Gosh.
And this is my ninth year, starting my ninth year at the college here and working with the students and overseeing the salmon hatchery. And it's just been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be here. The Fisheries and Aquaculture program here at BTC was founded by a gentleman named Earl Steele, and he ran the program. He found it and he ran it, and it was big boots to fill when I came in
Mm.
after he had retired. But he left this amazing legacy where there's no other college like this on the West Coast. It's really such a unique collaboration between a college and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Treaty Tribes and other nonprofit organizations, where there's this immense community effort to work on Chinook restoration and orca restoration and providing chum to support local fisheries. And since Earl founded the program, it's grown as well. And my colleague Sarah and I started together in 2017, and we've tried to listen to our community and what the needs are. So now, in addition to running the salmon hatchery, which also we work with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and run a trout hatchery up in Wacom Falls in Bellingham. So there's two facilities. We've also expanded here at our site at Maritime Heritage Park at the Perry Center for Fisheries and Aquaculture Sciences, that we're also doing aquaponics and growing tilapia and
Mm.
fresh, lettuces and herbs. And we are working with shellfish aquaculture. We've really tried to expand that. I know we're here today to talk about the Bellingham Bay fishery and the Chinook, but I also want to point out that Washington State produces the most farmed shellfish in the country. And
Didn't know that.
so we have an entire track of training for shellfish aquaculture where the students learn about how to raise shellfish and how to raise algae to feed shellfish, how to breed them. And our students get to work with this amazing array of local shellfish farmers and then work their way into the industry. So yeah, that was a very long-winded answer.
Oh
So
my gosh, I have
that
like 1,000 questions now. I'm like, I need a bigger notepad.
part, that's from like when I was a little kid on the beach with my dad to where I am now.
I have so many questions. You mentioned the community effort to
Mm.
really listening to the community. And I think that's one of the unique challenges that seems to be. You've been to so many different locations, you've worked in so many different locations. Is that community element where there's many stakeholders with many different viewpoints? Is that unique to Washington, or do you find that everywhere? I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a little bit of both. So everywhere that I've had the privilege of working, there's always been an amazing sense of community. I'm a little biased, but I think people who live on the water and work on the water, there naturally is a sense of community for that. I think it goes all the way back to when, communities really heavily relied on their fishermen, and it was part
Hmm.
of their entire village. So everybody was out looking for their boats to come back, and everything from like, those tragic stories of how they would paint the houses with the same color as the boat so they knew to connect the
Oh,
boat
that's
with the
funny.
family, or they would knit certain sweaters in certain patterns so that way they could identify, where a family member came from. So I think there's just something really deep and cultural embedded in working on the water, because there's all those safety aspects to it. And so that, yes, that is universal. What I will say is definitely unique to Washington is the co-management system.
Yeah.
And that was new to me when I moved out here. And it is the only state in the US that has a co-management system where the treaty tribes and the state share 50-50 responsibility of monitoring and research and management decisions and harvesting goals. And that has been such an amazing thing to be able to learn about and to teach to our students and to bring in stakeholders from those different organizations. We make sure that we have as many of those stakeholders serving roles in our advisory committee. So they advise not only our hatchery operations, but also our curriculum. And then they also talk to our
Cool.
students and they host field trips. And so, we naturally are diverse. And so having diverse voices at those tables, while it can be chaotic and divisive, it's important. It's important to have diversity representation. You know, fisheries populations or fisheries stocks are not growing at the pace of human stocks. We are
Right.
outpacing our food source. So that is a global concern when you have communities really reliant historically and in modern times on a stock population that just can't simply only provide the protein that's needed by humans. And that's where I think it's very unique that our program is fisheries and aquaculture together. I found that in other colleges and other universities, talking with our colleagues in higher education, they're often like either a fisheries program or they're an aquaculture program. They kind of focus on one or the other. And what we believe here really strongly, and that comes from our founder of our program who had a foot in both areas because of his family, that they're the just two sides of the same coin. Me, at the end of the day, it's making sure that our communities can eat.
Yeah.
And so, whether we are providing sustainable protein through really smart management and restoration and enhancement of a wild stock, or if it's by relieving harvesting pressure off of a struggling stock and providing protein through sustainable farming instead. And we're seeing kind of like a lot of land based farming and restorative farming, like with seaweed and some shellfish species, that we strongly believe that fisheries and aquaculture need to be taught together. And our students can pick their specialty track if they want to go down the fisheries route or if they want to go down the aquaculture, but they all share the same foundational core programs. They all learn about the ocean and our freshwater systems and about water chemistry and animal biology and genetics and human aspects, social science, co-management, the history of the treaty tribes here, and culturally how important our aquatic animals are to them. The local coast Salish people refer to themselves as the salmon people. So we
Mm.
make sure that all of our students get that foundation, because at the end of the day, whether we're able to harvest from the stream or if we're able to go to a local farmer, I just want to see people are being fed.
Hmm. So what would you say is a typical career path for somebody that goes the fisheries route or somebody that goes the aquaculture route? Would you say, where do they end up? Do you have any stories or use cases of humans doing great work? We would love to hear that too.
Oh, this is, as I mentioned, this is starting my ninth year, and I've now been here long enough that I'm starting to see our alumni in industry. And it's almost getting to the point now where like our alumni are hiring our new graduates. And that to me is just so exciting to see. We have a really successful placement rate for our graduates, and that's really due to our curriculum. We're not a traditional college program by any stretch of the imaginations. We're almost like classroom adverse, where we have moved most of our traditional lecturing online in almost like a podcast format, where we have, recorded discussions and we have videos for them to watch. Because when they're here in class, we want them to be fully hands-on and working in our community. So if we have an algae culturing lesson coming up, we'll have the students watch the videos online and do some a little bit of homework. But when they show up, I'm not standing in front of the class with a PowerPoint. I'm in the lab with them with our algae cultures, and we're breaking out the microscopes, and we say like, okay, we already learned about cell biology. Now let's actually use it. And I'm going to show you how to count algae density cells or identify different algae. Because if we're looking for a harmful algae bloom, like in our local estuary, we just dive right into the hands-on training. And so the students, when they graduate from our program, they not only have like a traditional foundation of the lecture materials and the textbooks and the videos and the what have you, but they have this full suite of hands-on technical skills. And it really sets them above other graduates from other programs because they just didn't like learn that, oh, we monitor salmon populations by setting out smolt traps and counting how many go out, and then we count how many come in. Our students actively know how to work a smolt trap. They do that as part of the program. They get certified in electrofishing. They go out and they do water quality monitoring with our local partners. They go out and do forage fish spawning surveys. So what's amazing about the pathways of our students is that anywhere between 80 and 90% of them have a job within a few months of graduation. And many of them actually have those giant jobs lined up even before they graduate because of the hosted field trips and internships and opportunities to work at other sites. They've already built their resumes and their professional networks before they graduate. Now, as far as where they go, students in the aquaculture track, if they're on like the salmon and trout, the finfish track, a lot of them will work at tribal hatcheries, state hatcheries, federal hatcheries. We have a handful of students that will work here in Washington, actually more than a handful, a good number of actually Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife are alumni of our program at some point in the hatcheries. We have students who will travel to Idaho and Oregon, California, and a good number of graduates also go up into the Alaskan system. And there's also the kind of private side of hatcheries where companies are producing like eggs for stocking, like Trout Lodge is an example of that. We've had graduates work for Trout Lodge. There's also the private farming side, like riverence. So we have students working at riverence. And then a small part of our fish training track is also aquaponics. And aquaponics is a really fast growing track of agriculture. And so we have a aquaponics
What is it?
farmer. Oh, aquaponics. It's so cool.
Yep. I'm going to ask all the dumb questions.
No, no such thing. So aquaponics is aquaculture and hydroponics put together. So aquaponics, and it's when you grow fish and plants in the same system. And
Okay.
incredibly sustainable because the fish poop and their poop is fertilizer. And then the fertilizer water then circles into the plants who then suck up all those nitrates, those fertilizers, and then they grow really well. And they essentially filter and clean the water that then goes back to the fish. And so compared to traditional agriculture, you can grow like compare like a head of lettuce in an aquaponic system to a head of lettuce in a traditional agriculture system. The aquaponics lettuce is going to use upwards of like 90 to 95% less water to grow it and less land to grow it because you can grow them in vertical systems like in warehouses. And so it is a great way to grow both fish and vegetables and herbs and lettuces and whatever you have when you have water sustainability issues, because the water is just recycled and reused over and over again, as opposed to watering a field and then that water is then, it goes back into the water table, and we learn about the hydrological cycle in our
Mm-hmm.
course. But, for the most part, that water's gone and you're not going to get it back for a long time. Whereas aquaponics, you can keep recycling that water. It's really sustainable.
So that's a new practice that's happening. I am not aware of this at
Yeah,
all.
I would say it's new and then not new, right? So
Okay.
it's this idea of like growing things together that have these like symbiotic relationships. And this actually goes like way back to like ancient China when they were growing like shrimp and carp in rice paddy fields, and
Okay.
that kind of same concept. But it's, what was old becomes new again, and now it's modernized. And it's really becoming popular here in the US. It kind of started in the warmer climates. And as the technology has been growing, we've been seeing it move up to the northern climates. And so it is somewhat relatively new in Washington state, but it's very versatile because you can be like a backyard aquaponics farmer. You don't need much. You just need like a small, water trough to grow like goldfish in if you want. Goldfish, they can like grow in anything. Goldfish are just like almost the
Super
cockroaches.
resilient. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can have just that water recirculating like in a greenhouse. And it's a really cool aspect of being able to produce food sustainably. So we're having students move into that. And aquaponics is something that we've been adding more and more to our curriculum. Because again, we keep the pulse on our community with having all the stakeholders as our advisors.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get told, hey, aquaponics is growing, we say, okay, let's add more training and let's find more farmers to work with so our students can intern with them. Similarly, we did that with seaweed. Commercial seaweed farming is the fastest growing sector in aquaculture that came out of like a NOAA research. And the Maine in particular has been really on the ball. There was a group called Green Wave, and it was founded by a former lobsterman, I believe. And then he got into seaweed farming. And Maine has been really kind of pacing out the country on their seaweed farming, but it's been moving over to the West Coast, and Alaska and California have been starting to produce a lot of farmed seaweed. And it just really started in Washington. Right now, I think there's only a small handful of commercially licensed seaweed farmers, but we're seeing that nationally, this is a really fast growing sector of aquaculture because growing seaweed is really sustainable from a farming lens. You are essentially, have these long lines and these buoys, and they're photosynthetic organisms. So pretty much you just need sun and some good nutrients in the water. And then they absorb carbon dioxide and they produce oxygens, and oxygen's needed for almost the entire marine ecosystem. And when seaweed again gets harvested, it can be used for a really wide range of things. Obviously, humans can eat them, and we're trying to promote, for the modern palate, like seaweed is amazing. You can now find in like Whole Foods, like bull kelp pickles and hot sauces, and I really recommend trying it. It's really yummy. And then we can see like a lot of pharmaceutical things, like people want like seaweed masks and lotions. And what's another really fun aspect of seaweed is that there's this great link with cows. So I'll explain that. When it comes to greenhouse emissions and our climate change concerns, one of the greenhouse gases that's a big issue is methane. And when cows eat, they essentially are very burpy, gassy creatures. And we have such a large cattle farming industry here in the US that we produce a significant amount of methane into the atmosphere that literally comes from like cows burping. And then there was these researchers in California that found that if you can substitute seaweed into their feed, it like significantly reduced the amount of methane that the cows were producing. So it has to do with like the digestive breakdown of like traditional plant fibers versus seaweed, which is more gentle on their system. And so when you can grow seaweed which helps. It's great to have any sort of photosynthetic organism in your water because they are sweeping up carbon dioxide and producing oxygen, and they can produce their habitat for like juvenile critters. They can hide in the curtains of seaweed. So great nursery habitat. And then when it's harvested, we can eat it, but we also feed it to cows. And then we're
Hmm.
helping with the climate change issues because those cows then produce less methane. So yeah, so seaweed farming is something that's new, and we're really excited to be working with kind of the pioneers in the state right now who are helping to establish that in Washington.
That's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I have a lot of agriculture ties, and I'm going to have to ask them about using seaweed as a feed source in cattle rations because that's really interesting. I wonder what the nutrient compounds is on the side of the animal that, makes it a win-win too from both
Mm-hmm.
perspectives. But very cool. I would love to know from your perspective, what's the biggest challenges facing fisheries and aquaculture in our Puget Sound regions or up north here in the Salish Sea, in your opinion?
I would say humans. We're
Yeah.
we're the greatest challenge. So I think a very important part of our program is just working with our community and outreach and education. It's from something as simple as please pick up your dog poop when you take them on a walk, because there is a shocking amount of fecal bacteria that gets washed into our estuaries. And if it gets in a high enough density, they have to shut down the shellfish farms and they can't harvest, and then people can't eat. So that's just one small example of just how a little bit of outreach can make a big way of please pick up after your dogs. And then also things like your lawn fertilizer. And can we not use like phosphorus to water your gardens and your plants so they're beautiful, green, and luscious from a landscaping perspective? But then once it rains, that runs off into our natural systems. And then the fertilizer that works on your grass is the same fertilizer that can help produce an algae bloom. And then you can get these crazy big blooms of algae and this kind of green muck that can then suffocate out an ecosystem. And then as that algae bloom decays, it can then produce more bacteria, and it's just not a great thing. So I would say a lot of our challenges are just ourselves and our neighbors and how we can change our practices. And then it also escalates up from regulations and government and having an active voice in your community and helping with regulations and policies and decision making. So, I tell my students a lot that, especially when we have like our environmental science classes and we're learning about like the global climate crisis and water shortages and all of these really big issues that can weigh really heavily on your chest, and you wonder just what could I even do, because I'm just one person. And I tell them that, one person can make a difference, and your political voice and how you vote and how you're an active member of your community, it matters. There's a handful of examples, even in the fisheries world, that has demonstrated time and time again that bottom up management produces more success stories than top down management. So we have to listen to the community. So when, Maine lobstermen were setting fishing regulations, it was a bottom up management decision. They were listening to the Maine lobstermen, and they essentially started to regulate themselves. And they came up with notching the tails because they knew that they were egg bearing females, and they would set their own size limitation because that community recognized what they needed to do to keep the stock healthy and to be able to keep harvesting year after year. Versus other examples like the New England groundfish fishery, where they didn't listen to their fishery community and the top down management, they just made these decisions. And by the time that they trickled down, they realized that it didn't work pragmatically. And then those fisheries suffered collapses, and then they had to be rebuilt after time. So yeah, we are the biggest problem, but we're the solution. So if we can motivate and educate, and my small part of it is my students, my graduates, that
Mhm.
they become extensions of our values and our programs. They bring their own perspectives, their own values, and they move into the community, and that's what we like to see.
Would you say our fishery is managed top down or bottom up at the current state from your perspective?
I would say it's a healthy combination. where there is a lot of public input, especially like the North of Falcon meetings, where we do have the co-management system, which is unique. So we really don't have a top-down traditionally here, right? Because that would just imply that there's one state government agency that's making these decisions. It's already breaking the mold on that because there's multiple government agencies, multiple stakeholders already involved in making the final decisions. But Washington, I feel, does a pretty good job of having these public hearing sessions and listening to the public. And again, it goes back to our roles as citizens, where if you're not happy, then talk
Show
about
up to a
it,
meeting.
right? Tell your stories. So,
Yeah.
part of the success of a bottom up management is the people, I don't want to say on the bottom, but that's traditionally how it's called, but the community voice is powerful. And if
Mhm.
so, be a part of that and come out and talk.
I appreciate that because I think that is one sentiment, at least I'm in the recreational sector. That's really the voices I hear the loudest because that's who I hang out with. And there is a lot of frustration, I would say. And I would love from someone who's in it more, if you were to give them one piece of advice, what should they look at on their label of their fertilizer? Because
Yes.
sometimes, like, make sure you use the right stuff is overwhelming when it's like, okay, dumb it down for me. What's the word I don't want to see? So that's one question. And the other question is, how would you recommend we could get more involved in a way that makes a difference? Because I think what I hear and have experienced is when things continue to shrink and opportunity continues to decline as a recreational fisherman, we get it. And we also struggle with it. And it's hard to feel hopeful and know how to make a difference in a positive, constructive way. So, any insight on that would be lovely.
Yeah. I would say becoming label smart, to address the first point, is really helpful. And
Mhm.
I have been in numerous fishing communities where they see the word farmed and they think bad. And I really hope to change that message
Ooh,
because there's
that's
a
good.
there's a lot of good, restorative, sustainable, eco-friendly farmed seafood, but also other things, shellfish and finfish. And so I would say it's really no different than going to a grocery store and looking at farmed chicken and farmed pork and farmed beef. That's all farmed products that people are eating. And people learn about the labels and about the company and they do their research and they try to find the balance between what they can purchase from a conservative, sustainable lens versus also balancing their family needs and their financial status. And so I encourage people to treat seafood the same way, that farmed seafood is an excellent choice. And just like with any other farm product, look into the company, see if their values and how they produce their product is in line with how you would like to do that. So especially if you can support domestic farmers. We import so much farmed seafood from other countries. It's crazy. There's this massive imbalance in the deficit where most of the shrimp that you eat is actually from international farmers. So start supporting domestic farmers. We're starting to see domestic shrimp farming come up, especially in the warmer climates, or we're seeing farmed tilapia, we're seeing farmed trout. So Riverence is one of the largest trout farmers in the country. I think it might be the largest. And I've had the pleasure of working with their staff and having our students do internships and getting to look at their farms and getting tours and just seeing just how focused they are on making sure that everything is sustainable from a farming lens and from an environmental lens. So I would say know your labels and research the companies, but farmed is good. Farmed is food. And so farmed seafood as well as wild harvested seafood. It's all a balance of, I guess you could say it's a balance of your morals and your wallet, because at the end of the day, food is food. And we need to make sure that people are getting protein. And aquatic protein from a nutrition label standpoint it's off the charts as far as comparing it to like cattle or pork. Seafood is amazing for you.
Mhm.
Now, as far as your question about feeling frustrated potentially as a recreational fisher and what you can do, that kind of bottom up approach is also from a geography lens too. And so start in your immediate community. And who are the state employees at that lens? Who are the nonprofits working at that lens? Who are the local fishermen in that lens? Start in your community and start forming a group and having discussions, and then kind of move your way up. And then you can start getting representatives from other areas who maybe share similar ideas. And then you can form this really loud and powerful voice to help advocate. And what I always tell our students is that the most important part of getting your point across is listening to the others, because you can also get siloed and in an echo chamber if you're with the same people and expressing the same frustrations. And you have to reach across the table and you have to talk to the other side and you have to understand the other perspectives. So in our training curriculum, we have a lot of kind of mock debates and mock interviews where we do that, time honored teacher tradition where we find out what our students' personal perspective is, and then we force them to argue the other side. You quite literally put them in the other shoes.
That's fantastic.
And learn about them and talk about them. Share a meal with them, share a seafood meal with them, and listen to the other voices, because at the end of the day, it's a balance. Mother Nature and our natural environments is constantly battling for a state of balance, a homeostasis where, things happen and other things ricochet to balance out the action. So we have to find that constant struggle within ourselves and our own communities where you're never. I heard this from somebody in management and it really stuck with me. It was an undergraduate lecture and they worked in policymaking and management decisions, kind of like as an arbitrator. And they were working in these kind of remote locations where you had indigenous people as well as industry people. And he said, at the end of the day, if everybody was just a little angry about the decision, then he actually did his job. Because that meant that it was as balanced as it possibly could be. So I think that really stuck with me, that there's no winning if you're fighting against somebody else. It's just only losing. So again, that sitting at the table and listening to the other voices and coming at it from a community perspective, because we are all a part of the same community.
So we just got to find the right tables to sit at. This is great. I really appreciate you highlighting the fact that listening is way more powerful than speaking. And I think oftentimes frustration causes voicing versus understanding. So that's really important. We're all humans. We all have the same goal and we love our fish. And I got to ask you, we are almost at the top of the hour here. I really think I could talk to you for probably an entire curriculum. There are a couple things you talked about related to salmon, and I want to ask about hatchery production. But starting with hatchery production, you talked a lot about loving farmed fish. And I think that's really interesting because it challenges the way I think too. Farm raise, not the same. You catch a king out here and you have it on your table and you make this beautiful memory that not only incorporates the catching of the fish, but the loving of the fish and the preparing the fish and sharing the meal. And you can't, in my experience, that farmed, and I come from a farming background, experience is not the same. So I appreciate that challenge because it is an important one to really think about what all goes into this.
So we make a distinction in our program between culturing and farming. So farming is like with our shellfish and seaweed and the tilapia that we have in our program, where we're breeding, we're raising the young, and we're bringing a product to a table. That's the whole farming cycle. And you see that with corn and pork, and our whole community has a very long agricultural history. Now, culturing is a little different from a hatchery lens, because to me, a salmon or trout hatchery that has a stock enhancement program, we're really like the nursery ward of a hospital. So for most natural origin fish, especially our anadromous species, they're most vulnerable when they're in that egg to fry stage. And research has shown that upwards of 95% of an eggs that are fertilized in a salmon red, they die before they get to the stage of leaving to the ocean. So the
Mm.
majority of mortality occurs really early. So a hatchery that's focused on stock enhancement, it reverses those numbers. When those developing little adorable eggs are their most vulnerable and people can come in and step on a red or little critters can get in and eat them because they're delicious, we are protecting them in a hatchery. So we have clean filtered water, and in our system we're natural flow through. So it's the same creek water that they would be growing in a natural environment. It's just then pumped through the incubation system. And we are like the nursery board attendees, where we're just protecting them when they are their most vulnerable. And then when they hatch and they've absorbed their yolk and they prove to us that they're healthy and there was no issues with the incubation process, then they're out, and they're out on their
Mhm.
own, and they spend the vast majority of their life out in the ocean. And then if they come back, they've come back successfully, navigating the same challenges that a salmon who naturally hatches in a stream also has to face when it comes out. And that's why hatcheries are very different than farming, because farming takes the animal through the whole production stage until it's a fillet on your plate. Whereas a hatchery is that we are there for just a fraction of their life, a very small part of their juvenile phase. And then they're out on the ocean and they're out navigating all the same challenges, eating the same food, avoiding the same nets, getting eaten hopefully by a southern resident orca whale. And then those that survive, they come back. And here at Bellingham Technical College and Whatcom Creek Hatchery, the returning Chinook are designated as a terminal fishery. So we naturally have a few barriers where they are not able to go up into the upper reaches of Whatcom Creek. So they are pretty much pool right around the opening of the creek here. And by being a terminal fishery, every single one of them is open for harvest. And this season, it's recreational fishing on the weekend and then tribal subsistent fisheries on the weekdays. And so we are anxiously awaiting their return. And we're excited that once they come back, they are here. They've fed the marine environment, they've escaped, and they've come back. And now they're here to feed our community.
And I read that there's a record return this year.
Yes,
And what contributes to a record return? Did you release more fish or was it, yeah, what happened?
no, yeah. So we were approached in 2018 by the co-managers, Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Treaty Tribe, to add Chinook rearing and releasing to our training program. Historically, we really focused on chum, and we support a chum fishery here. And so we heard the message. We knew how important this was to our community. We talked to the students and to our administration, and we decided to take on that challenge. And so since 2018, every year we've been raising and releasing 500,000 Chinook. And what we have found is that going back to my research in Ireland, salmon have different triggers of when they come back. And so they can come back, especially with Chinook, usually 3 to 5 year olds. And what we see around here is mostly 3 and 4 year olds. And
Hmm.
so the fish that came back last year might have been 3 year olds, and the fish that are coming back this year are their siblings, 4 year olds, plus the other cohorts, 3 year olds. So the more you
Mm.
kind of continue to routinely release fish, at some point we'll get 3 year olds, 4 year olds, and 5 year olds. And then last year's 4 year olds, 5 year olds, and then next year's 3 year olds. So it just kind of is this rolling collection of ages that are coming back.
That makes a lot of sense. And when you also talked about the triggers, and that's a very fascinating thing. I think what actually influences that trigger to return? Why are some fish coming back as 3 and some coming back as 5? Can you even tell why?
Yeah, we know more and more each year. This is one of the things that's really heavily researched in the salmon community. So we know that there's a genetic component as well as an environmental component. And so if you have like a 3 year old mother and she spawns with a 3 year old father, then the offspring have inherited that they should probably come back as a 3 year old as well. And so
Hmm.
that kind of generic inheritance is a little bit of your metabolism and your growth rate. And we all have that same thing with humans. We'll say like, oh, my parents are short, or my parents are long lived, or oh, my dad has a terrible metabolism and I hit 30 and I have the same thing. So we inherit those kind of like physiological traits from our parents. But the environment component is always going to be unique to that cohort, that level of offspring, because you could inherit, let's say, the trigger to come back as a 3-year-old, which meant that you grew really well, you had a high lipid content, maybe you inherited a behavior that you were more risk taking, and so you were able to be a really good predator. But let's say when you came out of the river, the estuary, the timing was off. Maybe it was really cold and we didn't get the annual plankton bloom that we were expecting. So we didn't get the zooplankton community that we were expecting. So there wasn't a lot of good food when you came out of the estuary. That's how your environment is going to be different than your parents'. So you might have a slower growth right when you enter the marine phase, which meant that you didn't reach a particular size or a particular lipid content by your 3rd year. So you're not going to come back until next year. You're going to stay out a little later. And the reverse can happen as well. Like you can have a 4-year-old and a 4-year-old mate together. Their offspring will probably also be 4-year-olds if all else is being equal, but it's not. It's Mother Nature. It's the wild ecosystem. So maybe that 4-year-old came out of the estuary and the timing was perfect. And it had this abundant zooplankton community and it could just eat itself. And then it grew really fast. And then so it might come back as a 3-year-old, even though its parents were 4-year-olds. So we understand the factors and the mechanisms that contribute to it. But as best as we cannot predict Mother Nature. And so that's the reason why we have a lot of in-season monitoring. We can do our best to predict based on how many smolts leave a system or how many hatchery fish leave a hatchery, how many we expect to come back based on natural predation and the targeted commercial harvesting. But at the end of the day, we have to do in-season monitoring. It's why our students might come in saying, oh, I want to work with salmon, but then they learn that, well, we have to understand the tidal cycle and the estuaries and plankton and zooplankton, and we have to understand all those factors because those contribute to those in-season monitoring and those stock forecasts to say, where exactly is the stock currently at? Because at the end of the day, we have to hit the bullseye on this moving target so we can allow people to maximize their harvest while keeping the stock sustainable.
Are you guys at capacity for producing fish?
Comfortably, very comfortably, because our program we are a small technical college and we usually have somewhere between 50 to 70 students enrolled. I will put a point out. Classes start September 17th and we do have seats open. And if you are able to be in the Bellingham area, we usually have training 2 to 3 days a week. If you are a commuter, we also offer online training, which you can like start those lectures and those foundation and then maybe move here for your specialized training. But yes, so we usually have about 50 to 70 students. We are located in Maritime Heritage Park inside the Perry Center, and we have maximized our wet lab area. So we can comfortably do about 500,000 Chinook, mostly because of the size of our outdoor ponds. So what's really fun history about our location is that the Maritime Heritage Park used to be the city's wastewater treatment center. And when the city decided to move it out of the downtown maritime sector, initially they were just going to make it into a park and only a park. And it was our founder, Earl Steele, who approached them, I believe with members of the Puget Sound Angler Group and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and said, hey, don't fill those treatment ponds in. These are great concrete ponds that we can use to raise fish instead. And that's where the Whatcom Creek Hatchery was formed in 1978 and had its first hatchery year in 79. And so because of those ponds, 500,000 is a really comfortable number for our students to be able to raise and release with keeping the densities in the ponds at their maximum health level. So we don't want to just put a whole bunch of fish in the ponds because it's going to mess up the water quality. They're going to be nipping at each other. So we have these like stock index, you will, index densities that we know what's the appropriate number of fish to have in the pond to reduce domestication. Because we want to keep these fish are meant to be released. We want to avoid domestication. We want to keep them as natural as possible. We want to have limited human interactions with them as much as possible. So with the Chinook, we keep them on site in the juvenile ponds just long enough that they can grow to a size where we can safely and in a healthy way clip their adipose fin. So that way, when they're harvested, if it's missing the adipose fin, you know that they are what we call a hatchery origin salmon, that they came from a hatchery with the intent of them being harvested or serving to save our orcas and feed some orcas.
Has anyone ever tracked a salmon? Like, can you track them all the way out to sea and back? Is that possible? And if so, what's the data behind it? If not, why not?
Yeah. Possible, yes. Feasible, no. Not yet, not yet, I
Okay.
should say. So we do have amazing tracking technology. So things like pit tags, which are these little kind of like acoustic tags that you can insert surgically into the fish. Also like satellite tags, which literally beam up to a satellite and come back with their geolocation. The technology is there, but we don't yet have enough resources in the open ocean to be able to track them really well.
Mm.
So in like freshwater systems, we can, put pit tags in salmon and we can see if it's an adult coming back, we can track them with the tags and see where they're going upstream. And at first, I've worked with pit tag receivers, if you will, where it's almost like an antenna that you're carrying. And so, like, you're driving along the water and then it'll beep, and you're like, okay, the fish is somewhere over here. And then you get out and you walk with it. And then you can also have like pit tag arrays where instead of a handheld, you can like have a curtain of them along like a stream. And then as the fish swims by, it dings, and we know that that fish has passed up through that area. So freshwater systems, we do have that technology where we can track where they're swimming out and when they're swimming in. But when it comes to the open ocean, really the only, we're not going to be in a little boat driving around trying to find them or putting up these massive curtains, arrays, in the open ocean. So really at that point in the open ocean, we have to rely on satellite technology. And satellite tags, the technology is getting better and better. But when it comes to a little baby fish or even just a smolt leaving out, satellite tags produce a lot of drag on them. And so it's not great for the fish, and we don't want to impact the fish negatively in our efforts to, tag and track them. We have been finding some really interesting alternative methods to track their migrations. One of the things that we do at the hatchery here, and a lot of the hatcheries do, is that we can put a thermal mark in their otolith when they're incubating in a hatchery. So the otolith is this little tiny little bone that lives in their brain. They have one on each side, and it lives in this chamber where it's not attached to the skull. It's kind of like free floating in this jelly sac. And it's how a fish helps navigate. So I explain it to my students like it's a stone inside of a balloon. And if you were to shake the balloon, the stone would hit different walls. And that's how a fish essentially navigates itself with these otoliths, these stones, ear stones in their brain. And we found, it was actually in Washington, this process was discovered in Washington, that the otolith grows rings like a tree does. And so we use otoliths in monitoring fisheries because we can harvest the ear stone out, ground it down, count the rings, and we know how old the fish is, which is awesome. The scales do very similar, so we can age fish with both their scales and their otoliths.
Oh, cool.
But it was found in Washington hatcheries that if you cool the water down by just a few degrees Celsius, you can change how the rings are formed in the otolith. And you can put like a custom barcode, if you will, into the very center of the otolith. And so we can then track how fish are returning to hatcheries based on the barcode. So at our Whatcom Creek hatchery, we work with Department of Fish and Wildlife that there's a unique code every year for a BTC fish that group, every year that code is unique to them. So that way, if they come back to us, we know that, yes, it's a BTC fish. Maybe if it strayed, then we can track that and say, oh, nope, a BTC fish went up into the Nooksack River instead. Or maybe they're doing commercial harvesting, and then you have port samplers who are taking otoliths out. They can actually come up with stock compositions based on hatcheries and say, oh, well, this catch came in off the coast of the Bering, and X percentage of the fish came from this hatchery and X percent came from that hatchery. So we can kind of track where fish are going retroactively by looking at the barcodes and kind of knowing where they scanned from. And another really cool thing about otoliths is that otoliths, when the bone is getting composed, it has some natural like carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, strontium isotopes in them. And oceanographers have found that there's unique isotopic profiles in the ocean. So as the otolith grows, and it grows out and it makes these rings, so the center out is like from birth to the end of its life.
Okay.
And you can actually drill into the otolith and do the isotopic profiles and then match them with the ocean map of isotopes. So we can actually track their migration out in the ocean based on the isotopic map we got from their otolith. Yeah.
Which can tell you kind of where the fish was traveling.
Yep, exactly. So it's broad because the ocean's big.
Yeah.
We have these general areas of we know which isotopic profiles are more abundant than in other areas. So we can also track that way as well.
And is isotopic profiles predominantly influenced by water temperature?
Water chemistry, yeah.
Chemistry.
So the type of oxygen and strontium and those other elements, carbon, what's in.
I just need to sign up for your class. Like,
we have the online classes. You should totally sign up and get started, and then maybe we'll get you really hooked, and then you can come up here for in-person training. So, well, I mean, we love it. I feel so privileged to be here, and I love sharing everything about what we do here.
I am absolutely fascinated. So I want to know two things. If someone has a student that they think could be a good fit for your program, what should they do? And then also, if someone just is like, this is awesome, how do I help? How do I support? What's the best way for me to support besides getting involved in our community a little bit more? How do we support you guys on both of those fronts?
So if you're interested in classes, you can go to the BTC website. It's a pretty easy to navigate. You just, click on new student and they have like the application materials. And what's really amazing about BTC, we are the smallest technical college in Washington State, which allows us to be really hands-on with our students. You're not a number in the crowd. And in fact, every student who onboards at BTC gets a special one-on-one meeting with a navigator to sit down with them and say, okay, what's your background? What degrees or classes are you interested in? Let's review, where your math and English skills are, and they can help set up a customized track for you. And we have a really wide variety of students in our program. For something like, we have running start students, so like 16-year-olds who are starting our 2-year degree and they're doing their college degree and their high school education at the same time. We have students who just finished high school who are starting. We have people who are vets or second career coming back a little later in life. We have industry folks because we offer not only the entry classes, but professional certifications. So we have people who maybe were in fisheries, but wanted to learn more about hatcheries, or they were in hatcheries and for salmon and want to learn more about seaweed. So they can come and do one of our professional certifications in those specialty tracks. And then we also have people who sign up for just like our foundation certificate, just a aquaculture theory. And so they can take those online classes remotely. And that allows them, just to take a few classes at their own pace and just to learn a little bit more about a specific topic. And, with having a smaller group of students, once students on board with the navigators, then they come over to the staff. And so we meet with our students every quarter. We check in to see, what classes they're liking, what topics they want to learn more about, and we really can help customize their training pathway. Now, and I will mention too, this is a really new part of our curriculum that we're excited about. We were able to break away from the mold of only enrolling in fall, which a lot of traditional colleges due. And we've set up our curriculum where you can now sign up in any of the 3 quarters. You can sign up in fall, which is mid-September. You can sign up in the winter, which is early January, or you can sign up in spring, which is usually early April. So if it feels a bit rushed to start now because classes are about 3 weeks away, you can still apply and meet with us, but maybe you will start in January or April instead. So we're really excited to offer that opportunity because sometimes people would find out about our program in like November and then would have to wait 10 months to be able to start the classes. But now they would just need to wait like 6 weeks and they could start in January.
Love that. And
Yeah.
how long is your program typically?
It depends on what pathway you choose. So the shortest pathway is our online certification. It's only 15 credits, and you could do that in 3 months or 6 months, depending on how many classes you wanted to take at one time. Our professional certifications, the ones that offer the really advanced hands-on training, those are 9-month certificates. And those ones we really recommend you start in September. So that way you can do the whole life cycle with salmon or seaweed or shellfish, get to experience the whole thing. And then we also have our standard 2-year associates. So that is starting in September and then graduating not that June, but the following June, or whenever you start. If you just start in January or if you start in April, it'll be about 2 years. And we also offer associates transfers. So if we have a student new to this industry and they finish our 2-year degree, we offer transfer pathways to traditional 4-year programs. So you can start there as like a junior and maybe get more into the research skills to become a full-fledged biologist on your own, as opposed to like a field technician or a biologist aide, which is what the 2-year degree will get you.
Cool. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. We'll make sure to link everything in the show notes. So if you
Oh,
guys are
great.
curious
Yeah.
about this, we'll have all the links down here for you to forward to students or sign up for yourself. And then how else can people support if honestly we have a very generous community that likes to donate to people doing great work. So
Yeah.
what is there an opportunity for something like that as well?
There really is. So I would say first, if you can follow us on social media, we have an amazing marketing team on campus, and they allowed us to have our own Facebook and Instagram. And so you can tell when the hatchery is getting really busy because the posts get a little slower as we're getting busy with the students and the fish. But that's a great way to kind of just keep up to date on what's happening in the program. We try to offer a lot of outreach events and community events and hatchery tours. And then as far as supporting financially, that would be huge for our students and for the hatchery operations. We have this wonderful organization on main campus called the BTC Foundation, and we can offer that as a link. And if people would like to donate to the program, they can just reach out to the foundation staff. And some people donate and they'll have specific goals in mind, and they'll say like, I'm donating this so you can help upgrade the hatchery equipment, or I'm donating this because I would like it to see it as a scholarship for students, or I'm donating this because I want to help provide travel funds so the students can go on a field trip. So that would be amazing. We as a BTC, we focus on serving as a whole lower income students and those that don't have as much community support. We put a lot of effort into trying to fundraise and provide scholarships and food banks and as much services as we can. So that way our students can really focus on their training and getting prepared for a career. We acknowledge that a lot of our students are working part-time, sometimes full-time, they have family lives. So we incorporate all those considerations into our curriculum. It's why we only have in-person classes 2 to 3 days a week, so that way you can balance childcare and going to work with your studies. But also, we're also open all the time. So if you're a student in a position where, you might only be required to be here 2 days a week, but I'm here every day, and there's always hatchery operations going on. So we try to serve our community, our diverse community, as best we can. So I would say we would be incredibly grateful for any generous donations for the fisheries part of the foundation.
That's awesome. I really love your guys' hands-on approach, married with some incredible science. And do you have any final words that you would like to give our audience before we sign off today?
I would say please support our program, please support our students. The amount of work and labor that goes into the hatchery to raise and release the Chinook for the fishery it's immense. And the students put so much passion and heart into it because they're working with live animals while balancing their studies, while balancing their outside life, their home life, their jobs. So anything you can do to support the program, it would be amazing. And if you would like to be a student, whether it's just for one class or really diving in for changing your career, that's what we're here for.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Brittany, for your time. We really appreciate you. And again, if you guys have any questions, make sure you drop them in the comments and I'll fire off an email and we'll get them answered for you. But thanks for tuning into the Fishing for a Reason podcast. We will see you next week, same time, same place, same channel. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye now.